Thank you for having me. Thank you for welcoming me into your space. We all love you, Liz, and I think hearing the chatter of lunch and seeing the connections you all make is just such a testament to what you have built, but you've built it on the rich assets of this full community, and I think part of why I wanted to come for 2 days is because I do like to be in the space. I like to get to know you. I'm very aware that I am an outsider coming into what is very sacred space and relationships. And so I just thank you for welcoming me and for all of the vulnerability and trust that has been demonstrated in the sharing that you've done and the community that you've built. Liz asked me to talk about turning toward each other, and a big part of that is belonging, and we heard from John Powell yesterday. And I want to say there is nothing that I am going to offer to you that you don't already know within yourselves. I've heard threads of everything I'm going to share. There's also, I believe, truly no new ideas. We are simply rediscovering wisdom and traditions and unlearning some habits that have taken us away from the very essence of our humanity. But we have tools and frameworks and evidence base and data and all kinds of things that help us relearn some of that, put some structure, and create containers to do that work together. So I will also say, I may challenge you. There may be things that I offer and suggest that are hard in this moment. Liz mentioned the Thriving Together springboard. When we met, I'm at the Rippel Foundation now, but I was 20 years in federal space at the CDC, seen a lot, like many of you. I was there through the pandemic. I've worked through, Kevin asked me just a few minutes ago how many administrations. I think we counted 4. So I'm going to talk a little bit from my experience about where and how I've seen change happen and what I've observed in communities that are effective at transformative change. I'm not offering any of it as easy. I'm not offering any of it as the first next step you have to take right in this moment, but as perhaps a path as you work through things yourself and as we all work through things and our experiences and what triggers us and what energizes us in the days and weeks and long years ahead, that these are opportunities to do the inside work, to be the agents of change that we need so desperately right now. I'll just say a little bit about the Rippel Foundation. We are an operating foundation. All that means is that we throw ourselves, our time, our effort, our resources into being catalysts of an equitable future of health and well-being for all. So we are relentlessly curious about what does it take to create transformative change at local and national and regional levels, and how can we do our part in this broader movement of thriving together to understand what that looks like and to share that and help support the uptake and the spread of those concepts. So this may look familiar. You have a postcard. You heard about the well-being survey. And in the corner of that postcard is this very same construct. And I know many of you have been here now for 6 years, 8 years. You've seen this framework, but some of you are brand new. So Liz did ask me to talk about a few things. So I will go through some basics of some of your interwoven constructs and frameworks, but then we're going to get into some challenging questions, and I want to leave enough space for you to actually have some decent time at your tables to reflect and talk, not just about what I'm offering, but kind of the threads we've heard throughout our time together. But this is our North Star as an organization. And every person in our organization personally also reflects on this as their North Star. You heard about it as a measurement construct a little bit earlier. It is elegant, it's simple, it's easy to remember. It is also, do not be confused, grounded on science. But it is science that is translated into a human form of understanding the human condition now and in the future. And when you look at the data, so you're collecting local data that will allow you to disaggregate and understand what is happening in your own backyard, but it is also collected and has been collected over time by Gallup And so we can see trends. This particular treatment happens to break it down by some crude race ethnicity groups, limited by the data that are available and the reports they put out. And I just want to highlight a couple of features because it is so much more than a pretty circle. I'm going to talk about pretty circles a lot in the next few minutes. It's very jagged. You don't see many trend lines that are this jagged. What you need to understand is if I were to overlay this with political points in time, economic points in time, climate points in time, pandemics, the presence of a vaccine, more elections, you would see they line up with those jagged responses. So it's highly sensitive to what people are experiencing. Yes, you can map it over time and see our progress, but you can also be very attuned to what the impact of different actions and strategies are in your community if you are collecting it that frequently. The other feature I want to point out is the ceiling effect. If I were to put these together in one line and represent the whole country, it doesn't change the fact that we have failed to go above 60% of people in this country reporting that they either are currently thriving or see a path toward thriving. I don't care what educational system you came through, that is not okay. So we use this as our North Star to consistently ask that question about, well, how might we unleash the potential, the trapped potential on the sidelines of our communities across this country to reach higher and higher states of thriving? And if you ask that question, you quickly come to reconcile with this notion that, well, our well-being is built on multiple systems that are not currently built for everyone to thrive. But we know, traditions would tell us, and I feel almost silly saying this in this room, long-held wisdom tells us we can transform that if enough of us, both individuals and organizations, come together, see themselves as interdependent, right? Our wisdom traditions tell us interdependence is undeniable. And we think about stewardship, and there's stewardship of our lands, stewardship of our culture, stewardship of our legacies, multiple generations looking back, looking forward. And if we see ourselves not as leaders, not as power brokers, but as interdependent stewards, and honor the fact that systems were designed by people, then it is people coming together in shared stewardship who can also redesign systems for that kind of transformation. It is only that will allow us to get to well-being, equity, and racial justice. So just a little bit more about interdependence. This happens to be, a blurry aspen grove. And if you know about mycelium and aspen groves, those trees are all interconnected and they talk to each other, right? So the health of one tree is absolutely tied in with the health of the others. We are no different. We are no different, and yet we tend to think about our problems and our solutions in siloed organizations, sectors, and individual approaches. So if we want to both honor interdependence and acknowledge that we have to break ourselves into more manageable chunks and units to get work forward, we need frameworks that can accommodate that complexity. And folks, who's heard of social determinants of health, right? So this is a health audience. I know more of you know about that than don't. Social determinants of health have been around for a very long time. And the amount of energy we have put into it should be producing a different outcome, but it hasn't. We have to question why. And a group of people, Liz was a part of this, North Sound was a part of this, Monty, David, others in the room were a part of this, came together before the pandemic and said, if we're honest with ourselves, we've done a really good job of naming the problems. This framework of social determinants has helped us name the problems, but we are not getting to solutions in the way that we should. And so how could we do better? And they reckoned with some of the limitations of that framework. I will say it was a bit of blasphemy for me to be someone coming from the Public Health institution of the federal government saying, social determinants is not the framework we're going to use to talk about how we repair and recover and build resilience coming out of this pandemic. And I had to fight that inertia. But you know, it was about careers and it was about legacies of history of individual academic pursuits that were built on that. And when we shed that, we said, how do we accommodate a question of doing better, bringing more people in, saying the through line doesn't have to be through health. Social determinants of health sort of says you need to value health in order to care, and that's why you're coming to this table, and health is setting the table. So the vital conditions were born out of, and you see all these logos, a lot of people coming together to say, we need something different. How can we do better? And they created the vital conditions for health and well-being. Sometimes we drop the health. Sometimes it's well-being and justice. So it is flexible in that you can use it. There are 7 of them. Unless we think this is also just a pretty wheel, I want to talk just a minute about the features of this framework and what allows you to really let it be an engine for conversation and, again, a container. I came to Rippel having been a user of this framework. In the end, we were able to bring 45 different agencies together around a set of recommendations using this framework. So 45 agencies get you outside of health and social services. You get into talking to environment, you get into economics, you get into all the agencies that touch every part of these vital conditions. So you all know this. If you're new to the partnership, trust the frameworks and the weaving that the ACH has done. They've done the homework. A couple of features about this, and the reason I like to show it in this way is because it's not just a pretty wheel. There was deliberation and intention in saying, we need to think about the conditions that matter, the conditions that count. So there are things that happen in a crisis. The resources flood to things that just help people inch back into base surviving, crisis housing, crisis counseling. Food lines get really long. We hand out boxes of food. I don't think anybody would be in receipt of those critical services and say they're thriving yet, right? That is absolutely necessary and important, but it is wholly insufficient to attain well-being and thriving. So we didn't leave anything to the imagination. We set some criteria for what counts for each of these vital conditions, and you find that here. It does a couple of things. It lets you have shared conversations about what you're working toward. It also lets you have shared conversations about who holds existing assets in the community that are touching each of these vital conditions. And when you have that conversation, you quickly see silos sort of erase, organizational boundaries fade to the side because most organizations touch multiple vital conditions. The other really important feature, and we spent some time on this yesterday, and John Powell spoke so much about it and continues to devote his work to this. Belonging and civic muscle is at the heart space, right? It is in the center. This is a circle by design. You don't enter and go down a linear path. You keep weaving in and out and in and out. And Liz has alluded to the interconnectedness of the many frameworks that the ACH uses. I think every presentation that we've heard has not been by accident. You see the interwoven nature of all of the work that this powerful partnership does. Collectively, you are touching on and bumping up against each other in each of these. But belonging and civic muscle are special, right? They are the heart space. It is a vital condition, but it is also a capacity. So by building belonging, you bring folks in, you let them know you genuinely care and are interested in what they have to say. And for those of us who happen to hold traditional seats of power, decision-making, resource allocation, it is a capacity through which we learn to also step back and hold the space that is needed to genuinely enable and untrap the assets that have been sitting here all along, taking care of each other in ways that were not always historically acknowledged. And there's a virtuous cycle here, if you know what that means, where there's a feedback loop that creates one thing that then goes back and creates the next thing, and you get into that virtuous cycle, and it is powerful. And that's with civic muscle. And civic muscle cannot be confused with just voting. I live in Atlanta. I have the wonderful experience of living in a very deep cradle of civil rights, a very deep cradle of voting rights, and a very deep cradle of voter oppression. And if all we did was rely on voting, it would not be a special place. But it is a deeply special place, as flawed as it is. I did not grow up there. I never thought I would stay there, and yet I am 25 plus years there raising my children, my now adult children. Because civic muscle is about everyday opportunities for an outlet of sharing, of coming together in community, of building choices and strategies about the future we want to create, and giving you an outlet and a space to genuinely say, I care about what you're saying, and I want you to have contribution. Guess what? Then they feel like they belong. Oh, you listened to me. Nobody's listened to me before. My idea got implemented? Wow. Now I'm willing to devote more time, more energy. And suddenly, when you think about budgets and time and calendars, we can get into a scarcity mindset where you getting what you need means I'm going to have less opportunity for me to get what I need. But when you work in this virtuous cycle, you start to untrap and open up abundance because you aren't relying just on one agency's budget to fuel all of the work of the community. You realize there is so much more that can be voluntarily given, that can be lifted up and elevated, and people want to contribute to their communities. So you can go from scarcity to abundance if you get in this loop. But the other part is these definitions are both aspirational and challenging. And this is where I want to invite you to really sit with what stepping into this and turning toward each other in this virtuous cycle asks of us, especially if we acknowledge that as many people are in this room and as many groups, well over 200 groups in the partnership at this point, there are still corners and places and spaces, perhaps because it's been uncomfortable, who are not here, who are untrapped potential, perhaps countervailing forces because, if we're honest, they feel othered or they at least don't feel welcome to belong yet. So this is where we're going to get to the challenging parts. I want to remind you to breathe, sit with what we're all experiencing. I no longer read nearly as much news or consume as much news as I used to, even given my life as a political wonk, and I'm married to one too. I was raised by public servants. But you can't avoid the harm and the trauma that is happening every day, just this week. I'm not going to stand here and deny that. So again, these things may challenge you and sit in the space that is comfortable to you, but I hope that in time you can think about this. So a feeling of love as part of a community, embraced for who you are and valued for what you bring. And then civic muscle is power of people in a plural society to work across differences. That's the hard part. As shared stewards of that equitable, thriving future. So I'm going to just pause. This isn't the discussion part. This is just sort of, I want to name that I'm not up here naively the person from the outside who worked in, the ivory tower, not on the ground, pretending that any of this is easy. You may be thinking, okay, but how do we embrace each other for who we are? Do I even trust these people with who I am? Do I trust that what they want and what I want can even approach the same thing? Is this even safe space to be vulnerable? And vulnerability is such a critical piece of building relationships. It is a critical piece of stories, and we saw so much brave vulnerability this morning in the stories that were told and the healing that can come from that. But you can't just walk into that haphazardly. So let's also think about the stories that we make up. We've done a lot of work in our organization with the frameworks of crucial conversations and crucial accountability, and one of the things that teaches you is that we all have stories that we're making up about the person in front of us or about an experience that we had, the person who cut you off in traffic, the person who made a decision not to approve your project, the person who voted for the other side, right? We make up stories, and we're deluding ourselves if we say we don't. Sometimes they're very well grounded stories, but it's still a story we've made up in our own mind, not in dialogue and relationship. We voted differently, end of story. I can't cross that bridge. We come from very different places they can't possibly understand. They don't value me, I can't forgive them. You may be sitting with any one of these, you may be sitting with none of them. But I think it's important to acknowledge that at any moment in this work, this can crop up. So let me lift us up a little bit, and then we'll get to some discussion. And I do want to talk about being ancestors of the future that future generations need, and give you a little bit of inspiration from others, because part of what I want to tell you is you are a very special place. And sometimes you bring in somebody from the outside to be able to tell you how we see you. But it's also lonely to be on a leading edge. And I want you to know that there are others all across the country who are also joining you, who are anchored and thriving together, who are using the vital conditions, who, by the way, we talk about North Sound all the time. They're learning from your stories, and you can learn, and I know you have learned from some of theirs. So really quickly, Be Well Palm Beach County, their partnership grew post-Parkland shooting. It was started and anchored in the behavioral health community, and service providers saying, we can't let this happen again. What do we need to learn and understand? We started working with them. They adopted the vital conditions and leaned heavily into shared stewardship, and have made it their practice to expand and build the capacity of shared stewardship, which is something I won't talk a lot about, but just it is a set of practices which we can measure, we can teach, we can cultivate and spot in communities. And they've agreed to invest in and expand belonging and civic muscle through everything that they do. You will get the links, and I encourage you to go look at their impact reports, because they have demonstrated the power of investing in those two specific things over time. They've attracted dollars, they've attracted resources, they were a culture of health winner from RWJF. More importantly, they have impacted the lives of multiple generations in their community. And they developed, I didn't realize that was a shared set of simple rules. And so I offer this as one tactic that helps you get into space where you have hard conversations, where you start to build relationship. We call them norms, simple rules. This is what they chose to put forth. And this is what they anchor in, not their strategic plan, right? They do that, but this is what they come back to as their heart space every time. Going a little less community and maybe a little surprising, I wanted to give you an example of maybe an unexpected space of leaning into belonging and civic muscle. So we are working with a set of C-suite hospital leaders who, by the way, are human. They are human just like us. They are fathers, mothers, aunts, sisters, brothers. They put on their underwear every day the same way you do, hopefully, and they make choices. They happen to have titles and maybe wear fancy clothes and make big decisions, but they are choosing to come together in a community of practice to talk about specifically belonging in civic muscle and what that means for their organizations, and how they, as leaders, together buoy each other to have the courage to keep leaning into this warm, fuzzy, but essential vital condition. And if you look at this, I shared the map, those are their service areas. They're in competition with each other in some of those spaces. And yet they are still coming together, forming relationships, because they are tired, like all of us, about the health systems they lead failing their communities. And those are some of the conversations they have together. The other thing I'll say is there is a health system in Wisconsin that was a part of launching Imagine Fox Cities. And you've probably heard this story if you've been around for a while, because Monty and others were instrumental in supporting them in their journey. One of those hospital systems was a part of this, and they've used vital conditions and thriving framework as part of their community health needs assessment. Think about that, a hospital system using the vital conditions to guide their community health needs assessment. The data that untraps, the difference in looking at the vital conditions from only looking at clinical outcomes. But this rural set of counties in Wisconsin, what would have traditionally been regarded as a very red part of the state, rural, old, industrial, I think it was paper manufacturing, if I'm not wrong, dying off, economic engine, classic, I grew up in Michigan, classic Midwestern pattern of youth growing up, not seeing a future, and talent fleeing the area. And so they came together, starting in an anchor of economic development and charting a path for the economic future of the region, but thankfully were exposed to the vital conditions and thriving together and collected some community data and quickly realized there were huge portions of their community that did not feel like they belonged. And thankfully they had the good wisdom to say, if we don't address that, there is no economic plan that is going to return this region to thriving. And so they have a statement about what they imagine the future to be, which is another key piece that is really important about thinking about what you're building toward, not just the systems and how we're trying to tear them down. And so I transparently also want to just share, I don't often share this publicly, and my staff would be mortified by this slide, but it felt only fair to say to you, we don't just ask this of the partners we work with, we don't just observe this in the success stories we see, we've taken this very seriously. So I joined 3 years ago, became president 2 years ago, and we released a strategic roadmap that is a decade of commitments. So we took the long arc of thinking about what are we committing to for the next decade, because we know this change is long arc work. And when we only commit to a year or 2 or 3 and then we pivot and change, that's disorienting, and it is denying the very thing that we're saying, which is systems change takes a long time. So our commitments are about continuing to foster and support this rising movement, and there are 4 things that we know we can contribute to that around telling the stories that reinforce that there is a positive, hopeful future that we are all working toward and what that must look like. Helping to support bridging across differences, seeing our diversity as a tremendous asset, and being able to call more people into this work because we have been insufficient in making enough progress working just within our echo chambers, so that we can shift those investments to vital conditions, and we have a whole measurement framework in that. The important part of this is what's under all of that is we also are doing deep internal work on our own organization, and we did about a 9-month values reassessment and recommitment, and you see at the heart of our values, our new values, is belonging. So we are walking this journey at the same time we are helping others and learning, and that cycle is really important to us. How many of you have heard of Sean Ginwright, read The 4 Pivots? This is almost embarrassing how tagged up this is. I brought this in because you were hearing from John Powell, so what more could I possibly have to offer? But I was revisiting this, actually. I spent my MLK day not watching the other event of the day, but preparing for this and turning to this book that I hadn't read in a couple of years, and it was just the salve I needed. I find this work to be incredibly challenging, but also incredibly inspiring. And so I think when we talk about turning toward each other and what that really requires of us to do that effectively, I think Sean's lessons and his voice are so incredibly important. So I know you can read, but I am also going to read some of this because I don't want you to miss it and encourage you to look at the book. Trust, vision, wholeness, humane relationships, and hope are the real lifeline of movement building. And he offers 4 pivots: awareness from lens to mirror, that is the deep interrogation of yourself; connection from transactional to transformative; vision from problem to possibility. And again, we talked about how the vital conditions came to be, and social determinants were so good. We're so good at telling the story of problems. I came from a public health institution. Every grant you write, you need to lay out the problem. You need to compel them with data about how bad things are. And then we get stuck and we perseverate and we damage people by telling the worst parts of the story. Some of that came through in the documentary, right? The systems have created harm by focusing on the problems, and we just out-problem each other. But when do we ever talk about the possibility and what we're working toward building outside of a budget cycle? What are we working toward building generationally? And then the presence from hustle to flow. And I will just say, as someone who endured the last administration through the pandemic, I think this is going to be, for me personally, I would offer probably for many of us, the most challenging part of the coming days, months, and years. Because there will be no shortage of distraction. There will be no shortage of that, oh my gosh, that is terrible. We must run and we must try to defend. And we will all be taken off our vision of what we are building. That is not to say there is not room and necessity in fighting against, but that pushes us into the hustle and pushes us into the triggering and the re-traumatizing and the avoidance of the real work of this too shall pass, and we will get a chance to have a voice in 2 years. I predict one house is, if history tells us anything, one house is likely to change. And in 4 years, we get to do this again. But if all we do right now is keep chasing the shiny thing they put in front of the media, then we stop anchoring in what we are building toward. We never get around to building the relationships that we need to do this work now and well into the future. So I think sometimes hustle to flow is about like, I'm just always busy and I've always got a side gig, but I want to think about hustle to flow in the context of this current time and in these moments of repeat trauma and onslaught of harm and damage. That is also a version of hustle to fight, whack-a-mole. That's what they want us to do. That is incredibly powerful in service of their goals, not anchored in our goals. So this brings it to sort of, right, power is found in the inside job that comes from our collective convictions that we discover when we imagine together and heal our own insecurities and fears. So how do you cultivate the ability to see the humanity in those with whom you vehemently disagree with? I know that's crazy to stand up here today and suggest that. These are not just my words, but I do suggest that this is the work. This is the work. And he even acknowledges, yeah, it's really hard work. And it requires us to see the myth in us versus them. I do want to say this does not mean that we forego our values, our morality, or walk across bright lines. But what I want to suggest, and John shared some statistics yesterday about, I think he was referring to the range of white people, if I remember correctly. He was sharing statistics. And there is a percentage of whatever you consider to be the other side. There is a percentage that we are not, it's not worth it. The self-protection, the harm that can come from that, the banging your head against the wall, all the things. That's not what I'm suggesting. What I am suggesting is it is reasonable to think that there is a proportion of people who made a choice that we know to have been not in their own self-interest, certainly not in our collective self-interest. But can you think for a moment that the systems, the organizations, the people in their community had so othered them, or at a minimum had so not heard them, not met their need, that they felt they were acting in their own and their family's self-interest? Can you just extend an inch of that grace to consider that? How deep that hurt must be. I'm not saying it's our job to convince them. What I am suggesting is it is our job to consider, what have we failed to hear? Who have we failed to invite? And maybe that invitation results in some understanding and some deciding, actually, this isn't a bridge we can cross. But when is the last time we invited even the conversation? In order to do that in ways that are safe, we have to do our inside work. So how many folks have heard of the analogy of the 6 blind men and the elephant, right? Okay, so quickly, for those who don't know, there are 6, I don't know why they're all blind men, but the blind is the important part. 6 people who can't see the full picture. And they're all in a room and they're all touching different parts of this thing, and they're arguing about what it is they're touching. I mean, they're really arguing. It's a trunk of a tree, it's a snake. They're all touching the same elephant, but they have their perspective, right? This is an age-old lesson that is used to share to remind us about perspective. Because vulnerability and perspective are key to getting away from the us-them frame. Perspective is interesting to me because it is not just about our own perspective or acknowledging somebody else's perspective, but saying there is always a view that I don't have, right? And it's only through partnerships like this and conversations with people who don't hold our perspective that we start to expose more of that. Vulnerability is a collective process of emotional disarming and communal risk-taking. Emotional disarming and communal risk-taking. But it has to be safe in order to be vulnerable, right? You don't just walk in and start being vulnerable. And so there are steps and process and time and effort that goes into that. Gaining perspective is not a matter of being right or wrong, but pulling back. Becoming curious. We heard that. Kevin gave us that offering yesterday about what is the common thread he heard, what do we all share in common? Holding on to that curiosity, but it's not curiosity about the incremental difference. It's not curiosity about the person who I already know believes the same things, and like, I'm just a little bit curious about your story. It's deep curiosity about, gee, what did cause them to make that choice? What caused them to hold that view? Stories form our views. If we don't lift up our stories, we don't have a chance of helping to share and shape views. If we don't listen to other stories, we don't have opportunity to disarm and seek a little bit closer understanding. So the last offering, and again, this comes from Jen Wright's work, is we need to become the observer of our own and others' possible interpretations. So now it's your turn. We're going to spend some time. How much time do we have? 15 minutes. So why don't you take 10 minutes at your tables and just reflect, what are you becoming? How might we shape a future for the North Sound grounded in connection and civic muscle and collective action? I have some starter questions. You can pick one, you can pick many, you can decide you want to talk about something else. I really hope that everyone will at least spend a moment thinking about the last question in bold. The top questions are all about conditions. How do you create the conditions for this kind of turning toward each other? But the last one is, what is the cost of delay? So what is the cost of not stepping into the hard part? So take 10 minutes, and then we're going to call to popcorn a couple of reflections. And if all you want to do is say, she's crazy, she's not from here, and what she's asking is too much, that's fine too. My feelings will not be hurt. So take 10 minutes. Thank you.
It's nice to be here again. My name is Monty Roulier with Community Initiatives Network, and we've had the incredible honor to be with this network for many years, and excited to hear, in the next 10 minutes or so, kind of what's bubbling up for you, any of these questions, wherever kind of took your hearts and minds. So Tiffany and I have mics and would love to just kind of open the floor to see what's bubbling up for you. So who'd like to share comments, questions, inquiries that's kind of coming up for you? Please, and if you wouldn't mind sharing your name.
I'm Luca Martinez. Do you want to hold this?
Oh, hold it, yeah, sorry.
What came up for me when I was thinking about this is the way that some bridges are really difficult to build. And I'm a trans man. There are bridges that would be dangerous for me to build myself. My family, most of them voted against my rights. Most of them do not support me. And when I came out, my biological father told me that I was wrong and he did not support who I was. And somebody in this room who maintained a relationship with him chewed him out, and he came back to me a year later and told me that he supported me and that he was happy that I found myself and that he was going to walk with me in who I am. And I want all of you to think about some of those people who you do not think are worth your time to speak with, because there are people out there who cannot speak with them because it would put them at danger, and because a bridge potentially couldn't be formed there no matter what they did. And a lot of those people, myself included, are trying to still. I talk to people all the time who could potentially be dangerous for me to speak to, but being open about it is the only way that I know how to try to make that change myself. And I think, the cost of delay, especially in a time like this, is potentially lives of people like myself. And I don't think that not speaking up and not trying to make those connections is worth that. So.
Thank you. And thank you for giving an example that is about the power of the collective, that it is not that we all have to walk across every bridge, but that when we see the many bridges, that there are different seats of positions that we hold, and we can, when we know each other, we can lean on each other and do that work on behalf of each other. So thank you.
Right here, in your name.
Todd Holloway and Luca, thank you for that. It's that kind of bravery that we all need to be embracing and showing. It's not an easy thing to do. We need to stand up when we see something wrong. Sometimes we're just going to have to say it, and that may come with consequences. But I think it's that time in our lives, well, it's that time in our history that we need to start saying something out loud. At my table, we looked at some of the prompts up there, which were very helpful. And under what do you need from yourself in this practice, immediately a lot of people came up with patience, time and capacity, and brilliant comments from across the table. I'm sorry, what's your name? Andy said humility and curiosity. Perfect. Humility and curiosity is definitely something that we all need, because if we were all modeling that more, Luca may be less afraid to reach out and talk to people and build that bridge.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for that right here. Oops. Do you have another one over there, Tiffany? Okay, please, your name.
My name is Eva, and in our table we were talking about what is the cost of delay, and how I see it is that the more we wait, a little bit more of our humanity goes away. And I'm saying this because you will see in the headlines saying like we're gonna deport 10,000 immigrants, but we don't, or they don't even realize that in those thousands there are mothers, fathers, brothers, and with each of them, one children will be left to an unprepared system that is like not ready to take care of them, and they're just left to a really painful and uncertain life. So to me, the cost of delay is really leaving all these children behind and not be ready to take care of them.
Thank you for that. Again, real lives at stake.
Anybody see one on this side? Why don't we bounce over here for a moment?
We just had to represent on this side of the room.
Thank you.
But the main thing we talked about at our table initially was about the cost of delay, and we kind of even just referenced it through like a medical analogy in the sense of if you have some sort of injury or harm and it goes untreated, then you run the chance of it becoming infected and leading to worse conditions. And if it does heal, it'll heal malformed and not be able to function the way it should. But I do also want to focus on the second one. I didn't even say my name. My name is Will Johnson, work with Snohomish County. But with the second question, what do we need from our institutions? Our institutions have much larger voices and platforms than we do. So we need our institutions to actually stand up, be open, be vulnerable, and express what we need to support our communities.
Thank you.
Thanks. See some heads shaking to that. Other things that were, do you want to grab that, Tiffany? I know you're very fast. We've been watching.
I can't take credit for this because a really good piece of wisdom was shared with me recently regarding vulnerability and how we need to be culturally sensitive about it, especially because different cultures come from a very reserved background. And so asking for someone to be vulnerable without having that perspective is really important, as well as also being trauma-informed and aware of the different ways we process information. And so asking someone to be vulnerable and them not being able to connect the dots, it's so important for someone to lay out, this is the reason we're going to do it and the end result.
Yeah.
Thank you. And could we just get your name?
Gabriella.
Thank you, Gabriella. Any other thoughts and reflections?
Right here, please, in your name.
Hi, I'm Alex Park again. I just heard what Gabriella said, and it kind of made me think about this thing that my psychology professor said to us, and he's a cultural psychologist. He said that cultures and people have this space in between them, and I thought about bridging in that sense, and he also said that sometimes that space can never be crossed. And I think that it was important for me to realize that even though I may not be able to bridge a space and only one other person could or will bridge that space, it's important to respect that space too. And the differences between our cultures make us so unique. And I think that what Gabriella said, Gabrielle maybe, sorry, but what they said about just like being aware that our culture is a dominant culture, like in the United States, like we should respect also other cultures' way of connecting and relationship, and being in that space in between. It's okay for us to not bridge sometimes too.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
true.
Thank you for that. Yeah, and I think John Powell was kind of reminding us as well too. There's the timing, and not everybody is in a position to bridge, and could be more harm. Thank you for that reminder. Other things around what's it going to take? What is this next kind of leg of this amazing journey that you all have been on to foster thriving and grow greater belonging? I see a couple people pointing to
Got
folks.
someone behind you.
Okay, I'm coming back to you because you're being spot.
You can get the courage up.
Hi, I'm Jaden. I think that this is helped by the idea of really stepping into someone else's perspectives, even when they are completely opposite to your own, because oftentimes their motivations behind those ideas actually parallel your own. And it's very difficult to see that when all you're hearing is diatribe or something that seems really harmful out on the surface, because oftentimes they might actually not have the education and the language to give you the idea that they're really after, the reasons behind why they feel the way they feel. They're giving these cut short statements that they've heard that resonate with them on some level, but they can't communicate adequately, to allow others to comprehend what they mean. So it comes out as harmful, and it is harmful on that surface. But if you sit and really get the idea of, well, why do you feel that way? What prompted this belief? Why do you have these ideas in mind? And why do you think this is the solution? Getting at those behind answers, and it's a very hard thing to do, to set aside those in-your-face statements, that in-your-face harm, because they don't understand the harm that maybe they're causing even by making those statements. Most people believe they are good, all over the board. No matter how they behave, a human's prerogative is to live in the way that they believe is right. That's what drives all of us deeper than anything. You're always going to have a small sect of extremists, and that's something to set aside as the example of what not to be. And I don't think that there's any way around that existing in humanity. So that's its own thing. But most people are not there. Most people believe that they are doing what's right and what's best. And if you can get past the surface level, often you can find where you relate and why you can both care, and how something they see might be something that you resonate with too, just in different words. It's all about finding the right words together, because we often have maybe different definitions of the words we use. That impacts our conversations probably more than anything. So if we can get past that, talk around something enough to get at the core of it, we're a lot more likely to find a better way forward.
Thank you. And I'll just say, that is also why it is so important, to go from transactional to transformative. One of the tools we have in that is actually not starting the conversation about opinion or about solutions, but talking about the future you both want for you and your family, the values you share. Because more often than not, to your point, you find common ground in the future. Where we start to break down is in what we think are the right solutions. But the first kind of blocks of trust can start to form when you take it off of these positional, right, us, them, right, wrong frames, and anchor in the things we hold in common, which are far and away, more often than not, very similar. And then you can back into, as you build trust and relationship, dialogue around solutions. It is the difference between deep canvassing, which is about convincing you to come around to my idea, and a future orientation built on legacy, multi-generational ancestry. Let's do one more and then we'll wrap up this session. You got off. I'm going to come to you after. I want to hear.
Mike. Hi, I'm Michael Villanueva. I'm with Compass Health. I'm their DEIB program manager. So I'm going to do a real quick experiment with everybody in here, and it's about contact theory, okay? How many here believe that we should have prayer in schools? Raise your hand. How many of you don't believe we should have prayer in schools? Raise your hand. Okay? So what do the person that you do not agree with look like? Okay? So I have a parent here that believes there should be prayer in schools. I have a parent here that doesn't believe we should have it. So I want them to go back and forth and tell me why they believe so strongly in what they believe. Well, I think we were founded on certain principles. That's why we need to follow that and make sure we still do that and carry that through. Person over here says, I don't want somebody telling my child about another religion that I don't believe in. Well, why do you feel that it's so important? Well, like I said, it's about someone's core beliefs. Well, my core beliefs are different than yours. Okay, so tell me, why are you so strongly holding on to this? Because I care about my child. And this parent here, care about my child too. So you have to look beyond the surface and suspend your judgments. That is one of the core things that I tell people when we do any DEIB training is you need to stop for a second and you can actually feel DEIB. Because when you start getting a really strong response and you feel it over here, that's culture. And you need to stop when you have that kind of response. Thanks.
Thank you. So, Becky, I was just thinking, did you have one more? Yeah, please.
Yeah, I can be brief. I guess I'm thinking a little bit about how there's like physically not space in our lives or in our communities for us to see and be seen by each other. And so I think like what I notice as kind of a foundational step to a future we all want to belong to is more potential for interactions and more potential for people from a wider net to see and be seen by each other. Yeah. So I don't know how we solve that collectively, but like a chit-chat corner in every cafe or restaurant where strangers are actually encouraged to talk to strangers, or some other thing that we can help our kids maybe, because I see a lot of lost skills and people not even being willing to pick up and make a phone call anymore. So
Yeah, that's powerful.
Thank you for that.
That container that John was referring to yesterday, and it starts with an act of courage to do that initial space creation and taking that leap.
Exactly. I was just going to, real quickly, I was thinking, in some ways, it's a little bit of what started to happen here over the last several years. There's not enough of it, but I know that Liz, even as she's sharing with other groups, like, what's your sustainability strategy for this work? Relationships, relationships, relationships. And you all have been building relationships in ways that many of the other ACHs, in fact, I can't think of any that have done it like you all. And when Becky first started talking about this Thriving Together plan, the very first community that we called was North Sound, and talked to Liz and Daryl. And it was around this inquiry around what's it going to take to thrive, and our assumption on what our resilience was. And it was in those conversations, again, it was this idea of what are we holding right now, and what is that thread of hope around how you all are telling stories and new stories and living in the stories. So I just want to say it's extraordinary where you've come even in the last 5 or 6 years just from the outside, and I just congratulate you, and it's going to be exciting to see what unfolds even in these kind of incredibly tough times. So, Becky, I'll throw it to you.
Thank you. Thank you all for playing along. Sometimes you do this and people start talking about lunch and making dinner plans and going out, but I could see the deep conversation. I'm almost done, I promise. But speaking of stories and speaking of the tradition of storytelling that is so rich here in this place that we've already heard a lot about, I just want to offer and remind that it is never too late to think about the story you want told about yourself, about your role, about your contribution. So think about that. Think deeply about that. That is where the inside work begins. And I'm just going to read the longer passage that's already on the slide to say, in our dance through the wilderness, we come to realize that transformative justice is not so much about left or right politics, progressive or conservative policies, not red and blue states. These are the old binary political configurations that keep us lost in the woods, circling without a map of where to go. There is a third way, and it's neither left nor right, but up. The third way is an evolution in collective consciousness that transforms how we relate, interact, work, and play together. In our journey to create a more just world, all of us must learn to be more human and lean into the courage to create a world based in love and justice. Now let's go into the wild together, without fear, knowing that collectively we are destined to find that there was never a wilderness at all. Thank you so much for allowing me to be with you.